Christy with the Chirp YouTube channel. Today we're going to have a little chat about perseveration. What is perseveration, you might ask me? And I will tell you, it is when a person continually returns to the same topic over and over and over again. If you work in the field of special education, you probably see this the most in children who are on the autism spectrum. If you don't work with children, you've probably seen it the most in elderly people who have dementia. There's something about the wiring of the brain that when it is a little off, it continues to return to the same topics again and again. With our younger kids, the wiring of the brain has something to do with it, and it is a self-soothing mechanism to have repetitive things in our life. You probably know this. If you get nervous, maybe you sing the same little song that your mother sang you when you were a kid. You probably follow some similar patterns in your life in a lot of different areas, and those are probably a lot stronger when you are nervous or when you are uncertain. If you think about it, our children who have diagnoses are kind of often shoveled through the world, forced into activities they didn't choose, they don't particularly like, and they probably need a lot of coping strategies to help them get through that. I wish it weren't the case that we had to push so hard to make children seem neurotypical. I wish we didn't have to push so hard to teach our kids all the academics in the world right now. There are more important things than academics, and engagement and the ability to interact with people and with the world are a couple of those things. Having said that, perseveration can be a problem if it prevents people from interacting with the world and engaging with people around them. And so I'm going to give you some hints today on how to respond in situations where somebody is being perseverative, and some strategies for moving past that in order to get to some more interaction. The first hint I'm going to give you today is to treat perseverative communication as meaningful communication. Even if it is simply a self-soothing strategy, it still should be treated as if it means something. I'm going to tell you some stories about my little friend Jay today. She has kind of grown through this phase a little bit. She still has topics she greatly prefers to discuss and think about, but it's a wider range of things. It's more age appropriate, and she can be redirected to other topics just because someone else is interested in talking about something else. She doesn't constantly bring it back to the same thing and refuse to talk about anything else, which used to be the case. And in fact, she had a couple of different phases in her development where she was very, very focused and interested in particular topics. First of all, there was sharks. She only wanted to talk about sharks. And then there was weather, and every conversation had to have weather in it. And then there were animals, and animal sounds particularly. And all of these things happened when she was still very young, under the age of 10. I guess that's not very young, but she was fairly young. And her language skills were still emerging. They were not very strong yet. And she didn't have very good ways to interact with other people in a way that would make them laugh, in a way where they would respond to her in the way that she wanted them to. These were kind of sometimes communication strategies. Sometimes they were ways to get other people to interact with her. She just didn't have the experience yet or the communication capability to interact in ways that didn't involve these things. And also, these were seriously very interesting topics to her. She still is fascinated by weather. In fact, she has a YouTube channel now, which is absolutely fantastic and adorable. And she'll film the rain or the thunder and the lightning. Lightning is her very favorite. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have areas of interest. The problem is when these areas of interest become so specific and so intense that we can't branch out of them at all in order to interact with other human beings who don't share those interests. With all of these strategies, I want to mention that the very first thing we need to figure out is what purpose this continual focus on one topic serves. And then we need to teach additional behaviors that could serve the same purpose. So if a child's trying to make people laugh by making animal sounds, then I might want to get a very simple book of jokes and teach her a couple of jokes. If this behavior is a self-soothing behavior because the person is nervous, then I might want to create with him a list of other things that could help him feel calm. Maybe rubbing his legs, maybe squeezing his hands together, maybe saying his soothing phrases, but just under his breath or just in his head, so that it doesn't inhibit his relationships with other people or make other people think he is strange and not worth investing in. I do realize that people who have different brains don't necessarily want to change their behavior because neurotypical people think they should. And we want to help all people function better in the world. And there is a balance between those two things, between being respectful and helping people grow, between being respectful of difference and preference and helping people grow and be better human beings. We want both of those. We don't just want one. I don't want to force a child never, ever again to talk about things that really interest her. And I don't want her to get stuck in talking only about that thing to the exclusion of having friendships with other people. I believe both are important. So you will notice that as I'm talking, it's going to keep coming up. We need to make sure that we find out what purpose those behaviors serve, and then we offer additional ways to meet those needs if at all possible. Our next tip is to say something different about this topic every time the child brings it up. Treat it as an opportunity to have a back and forth conversation. If our child says, "Sharks in the ocean," I might say, "Also, there are jellyfish in the ocean. Jellyfish are nice and squiggly." And then we move on to talking about whatever else we were talking about. Then our child says, "Ocean has sharks." And I say, "Yes. I don't like sharks that much. They have really big teeth and they're kind of scary to me." We bring up something a little bit different every time the child talks about it. This can introduce the idea of back and forth conversation. Even if the child is saying close to the same thing every time and you're taking a different turn, it can still lead to the pattern of back and forth conversation, which we want to encourage. Let's assume that you have a student who continually asks the same question. This is very, very common. What are we doing after school today? Is today Grandma's house? Going to Grandma's house? Going to Target? Turn right? We're going to turn right. We're going to turn right. Kids oftentimes repeat the same question as a method of calming themselves when they're not sure exactly what's going to happen next. I also read a really interesting article by a woman who has autism. She's in her 60s now. And she mentioned that her very, very visual brain didn't easily keep track of what was happening when, and she constantly needed to remind herself, and she did that by repeating the same thing over and over. So, work, then groceries, work, then groceries. And she would say it out loud all the time, especially when she was feeling anxious, just because she knew she needed to remember. It didn't have a parking spot in her brain. That was how she described it. And she suggested that people be taught to picture a garage and picture that thought that they need to remember, zooming into the garage and parking in a particular spot in the garage. She said this has helped her to remember. She also gave some other tips. I'll link to her article down below. But it's very interesting to me to think that because the brain is wired a different way, perseveration actually serves a purpose of helping people remember, helping people hold on to words that aren't their natural language. Their natural language is visual, what they see with their eyes. In which case, it would make sense that we should use visual tools to help kids get a grasp on things. If a child keeps repeating, what do we do after school? What do we do after school? Then it seems pretty clear that we make a schedule and we put Tuesday's activities, Wednesday's activities, and we list down there school, and then there's a picture after school of what happens after school, whether we're going swimming, whether we're going to the park or to grandma's house, whatever the case may be, that picture will be there. You can also send that picture with a child to school so that he can look at it and remember what he's doing after school. He doesn't have to constantly remind himself. You can use the visual strategy as well to remind a kid that we're not talking about a particular topic anymore because you already answered it. If this topic is a question. If a child continuously asks questions, make a visual, draw a little picture or write the word down, and you can just point to that and you don't have to actually answer the question. And eventually the goal is the child will just look at your reminder card and not need to ask the question. I have a student in my class right now who doesn't interact very easily. She finds it very difficult to think of things to say and to interact with people. And so she'll just say, doctor. And of course, everyone is concerned because we think she feels sick, or we think, oh, that's a topic, I know how to ask questions about that topic. So we say, oh, did you go to the doctor? She says, yes, doctor. And we say, oh, what was wrong? And she'll touch her throat, or she'll touch her head, or she'll say, hurt. And so then people are really interested. We're trying to figure out, did she fall down while she was with us? It's not that she did go to the doctor or she is going to the doctor. It's that this is a really good strategy for her to interact with other people. And this is another example of why we need to teach more appropriate interpersonal skills. We need to teach this girl how to say, hi, how are you? How was your week? We need to help her with visuals for sure. We need to help her express what she did during her week. And doctor is not going to be on that list because I don't want to hear about the doctor anymore. I want to hear about new things. By this point, we've done a lot of thinking about what this perseveration means to the child, how it's effective for her, and we have figured out that we need to teach a few new skills along the way to help this behavior to decrease. At this point, we may be thinking, all right, we've got these strategies in place, now we need to start weaning her off of this behavior a little bit. Once again, sometimes kids need this behavior as a coping strategy. I am not saying that we prevent kids from talking about things that they find interesting. I am saying we start to shift conversations to other areas as well. One of the ways that we can do this is by setting particular times of day. Depending on how significant this issue is, those times should be more or less frequent throughout the day. If my child talks constantly about plumbing, then I'm going to set lots of times, maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes every hour, that this kid gets to just talk to me about plumbing. If my kid just regularly brings up sharks while we're having other discussions, then I'm going to set aside less time because this kid doesn't need to discuss that quite as much. He's not showing that internal drive quite to the degree that the plumbing kid was. We're going to set aside time where the kid can research that issue, talk about that issue, really focus hard on that issue. But it's going to be set times and for set limits. We're going to remind the child when that time is not now, that we're waiting until 2 p.m. and then you can do lots of research on the computer on sharks. We're waiting until noon and then we're going to talk about lightning for 10 whole minutes. It's going to be great. And so we just kind of increase the time between the times that we're talking about that particular topic. It's not a bad idea either to reinforce the times when the child isn't talking about that particular topic. So we could set a timer for an hour, and if the child has not talked about sharks or lightning or plumbing or whatever the issue is for that period of time, then maybe they get to do a special activity, or they get to bounce a bouncy ball against the wall, or whatever some reinforcing activity would be for that particular child, in addition to actually talking about the thing that they like to talk about if they want to do that. If my student keeps bringing the conversation back to the weather, or keeps telling me, lightning outside, scary, lightning outside, scary, scary, scary lightning, I'm trying to teach a lesson, or we're playing a game of some kind and that keeps coming up, well, I would say change the situation as much as possible. Introduce a different activity, introduce a new character in your play who is either really super naughty or really super wonderful and saves the world, but definitely is over the top. Bring more emotion and affect into whatever it is that you're doing, and it's likely to take the child's mind off of that perseveration for a period of time. If you have specific activities or games that your child really, really loves, then set those aside for times when you need to break that perseverative cycle. Then you can pull them out and say, we're all done talking about lightning. We're gonna play Star Wars Legos, hooray! We also want to continuously teach and remind our children and our students that not everyone shares their intense interest in the topic that they love so much. Sometimes our children don't realize that not everyone else sees the world the way that they do. And I am the same way. I assume everybody thinks the same way I do until I am forced into the realization that it's not true at all. I'm very unique. Our children need to be reminded of that as well. They don't naturally think about other people's perspectives much of the time. We can help that when my little friend brings up sharks. I might say, I'm bored of sharks. Let's talk about cats instead. I really like cats. If my friend brings up plumbing, I might say, a lot of your friends think plumbing is gross because poop goes down the pipes, and most people think that poop is really gross. Maybe we could talk about something else that we both like. Sometimes we might say that you can only talk to every person in our family one time per day about this specific issue. You can even write a chart with a checklist. Did I already talk to mom about sharks? Did I already talk to my sister about sharks? What about dad? If I talk to everyone about sharks already, then I have to come up with a different topic. If your kids have the ability to monitor themselves that way, that's a great lesson to practice. My little friend did not have that ability yet, and so we had to use some of the other strategies that I've already mentioned in this video, like distracting, like setting specific times where we did talk about her preferred objects in depth. There you have it, some tips on perseveration. I hope you got some good hints out of this and that you have a wonderful day. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.